Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek, the original series, Season 3. This video is part of a series of videos where I review every episode of Star Trek, one season at a time. In this video, I will cover all the episodes of Season 3 of the original series. So, Season 3, the final season of the show, was made because of a fan campaign to a letter campaign to pester NBC to keep it on the air, even though its ratings weren't that good. Apparently its ratings were actually kind of decent. It's just the way that NBC kept track of ratings made it look like it wasn't good. But anyway, because it had a reliable audience that would return week to week. But anywho, so they kept it alive for a third season, but many of the creative staff, including Roddenberry, who kind of just fucked off and wasn't really that much involved this season, and most of the people like DC Fontana and all the other people who made the first two seasons great pretty much left. And so you were left with a bunch of people who weren't really there for the first two seasons that much, or didn't really understand Star Trek. And yet several factors. You had they wanting to put it, they changed the time slot to a death slot that would guarantee the show's cancellation. And because it was at this slot, which was 10 o'clock at night on Friday night, they wanted to appeal more to female audiences, particularly young teenage girls. And so that's why every episode pretty much in season 3 has a romance of the week subplot. Some of them actually have a prominent female character, which is good, but most of them is just a romance of the week. And so season 3 obviously is notorious for being the worst season of the original series. Now, when I was a teenager and growing up, I was always a staunch defender of season 3, mainly because I felt like there were a lot of good episodes that people slept on, that I felt like they were neglected just because they happened to be in season 3, that I actually thought were really good. And so, I was kind of like, I don't know, a lot of times I naturally lean to being a contrarian. Like, if everyone's telling me something's horrible, and I think, well, it's not that bad, actually. It's actually kind of good. So growing up, I always said that I preferred season 3 over season 2, which is something I mentioned in my season 2 review, and I got a lot of pushback saying, "Oh, really? Are you sure? Are you sure you're not gonna like because season 3 is like way worse?" And here's the thing. So I watched season 3, obviously, before making this review. And it's probably the first time in decades that I sat down and watched the entire season from start to finish. And, it was hard to get through. Particularly the first half of season 3. Now, as always, as I did with season 1 and 2, I watched them and then will review them in production order, which is a bit of a different order than what you'll find on Netflix, so I'm a bit of a contrarian there. So I did go slightly out of order, but like the first 10 episodes or so, I was just like done with the season. I'm like, why am I torturing myself with this crap? It was just horrible episode after horrible episode. I look at the list and I was like, what episode's next? Oh no, not this one. All right, what episode's after? No, not this one. And it was just bad episode after bad episode after bad episode. But in the middle of the season, there was a lot of decent episodes. Episodes that are like, they're pretty good. Like that's what I remember of season 3 of having like Dolene Webb, Dave the Dove, that sort of thing. And I'm like, yeah, no, these are decent. Let be your last battlefield. And like these are decent episodes. But then towards the end of the season, there are actually a lot of the episodes that I really love that no one else really likes. And I do think I have a higher opinion of season 3 than most people because I have a higher opinion of these specific episodes, which I'll get into, which I always loved. And not many people either. Most people think I would say they're mediocre or not very good. And I love them. Or there's some episodes I think are pretty good that other people think suck. So, I actually got better. My viewing experience got better once I got over that first hump, which was really hard to get through. Like, it was torture. But then I got a lot of decent episodes and then some great episodes. However, there were still terrible episodes sprinkled in at the towards the end. No, the main thing being is 3 of the worst episodes of the entire show are at the end of the season. Now it's kind of intercut between great episodes I like, so it's funny towards the end of the season it's like great episode, terrible episode, great episode, terrible episode. And then great episode, then the worst episode of the entire show ends the season. So it was still, even though it got better towards the end, there was still crap I had to deal with. It just wasn't one after another like the beginning of the season. So, conclusion, I will have to say, yeah, season 2 is better than season 3. I'm sorry. I think I mainly liked saying that season 3 was better than season 2. For one, because I like being a contrarian. And for 2, I was focusing on the good episodes that I think people neglect. And I do think there are a lot of good episodes that people neglect, which I'll get into later. And kind of ignoring all the crap that people rightfully hold up and be like, hey, this season sucks. So to be clear, I don't think season 3 is one of the worst. Like, I think my sister has been on record recently saying it's one of the worst seasons of the entire franchise. I actually don't think that. It doesn't really come close to me for being one of the worst seasons of the franchise. That would be the first 2 seasons of Enterprise, first 2 seasons of TNG, season 3 of Voyager, and now season 2 of Picard. Those are clearly the worst, and for me, this one is not in the group with those seasons. But anywho. Let me go ahead and get into season 3 of the original series, and let's start. And again, as I was saying, I'm going in production order, and we're starting with the first episode that was filmed for season 3, and that is Spectre of the Gun. Now, this is where a lot of people probably disagree with me because I don't like this episode, and I did a full-length review of this already, and I got a lot of pushback, a lot of disagreement. To be fair, part of the reason why I don't like this episode is I don't like Westerns. But to be fair in the other way, this plot is contrived and doesn't make sense. You kind of have to like Westerns in order to forgive how sloppily written the Western theme was just thrown in there. So in this episode, Kirk goes to make contact with the race. The race contacts him with a warning saying, hey, don't come here. We don't want you here. We will kill you if you come here. And Kirk's response to that is, fuck it, I don't care what they say. Let's go there anyway. We're going to make first contact whether they want to or not. And what the fuck kind of policy is that? And so Kirk just ignores their warning and just prances on their planet without fucking permission And then they're like, oh, we're going to kill you now. Duh! Of course! Like, I was just, and I can't get over that. And then, and so rather than just simply killing him, they reach inside his mind and go into this far, like, tiny corner of his mind to pull out a historical incident from what now? From over 500 years ago, that has very little significance, and they recreate it in great detail. Now, granted, it's not perfect detail, like the buildings aren't built because it was cheaper for the sets to make this episode that way, but still, a lot of detail from the tiny little portion in Kirk's mind that they managed to rip into, which, you know, I don't buy any of that for a second, so that they could create this no-win scenario. Why not just fucking kill him? Now, I know that the episode tries to say later, oh, they wanted to test Kirk and see if he was a good man, but what does he do? Like, he doesn't really... They cheat. They had used Spock's telepathic abilities in order to cheat death, and then they refuse to kill, you know, the herbs, which are not really the herbs, they're just images that these aliens created. So they refuse to kill images that they know for a fact are not real people. And so they're like, oh my god, I misjudged you, you're so great, now we can make contact, you're good in my book. Like, what is that? That doesn't make any sense. The whole plot is so dumb and nonsensical. And so if you're into Westerns, into Wyatt Earp, you probably don't care about any of that. You're just like, Wyatt Earp, Westerns, love this shit. But I don't have that to latch on to because I'm not into Westerns. I don't give a fuck about Wyatt Earp. And so I don't have that balance to for me to overlook how terrible this episode is. Now, I will say I did like how they portrayed I actually like this better than Tombstone. I didn't like that movie. Again, I don't like Westerns. I think that movie's so overrated, and I actually hate it. Because they portray Earps as like, great bad guys, good guys shooting the bad guys, boom, boom, boom. Where this episode actually does a better job at portraying a more complex situation where there's just two families who hate each other and refuse to see reason and aren't really no good and bad guys. So that's definitely my favorite aspect of this episode, which is why I like the movie Wyatt Earp with Kevin Costner much better. Anyway, but overall, yeah, still what I would call a bad episode. So let's get into the next episode, which is Elian of Troyes. Okay, so in this episode, Kirk participates in a forced marriage where two warring worlds are gonna form an alliance through a marriage where this stuck-up, entitled, you know, royal rich person is forced against her will to marry someone on this other world, and she comes on board, and of course she doesn't consent to it, and she's really pissed off, and she's pissy because she's being forced into a marriage where she had to live the rest of her life, probably have a sexual relationship with this person that she despises and doesn't want to be with, and she's forced against her will, against her consent to do this. And Kirk's response to this is like, shut up, you fucking brat, and do as you're told. Okay. Now, I will grant you, and I'm sure there's a lot of historians being like, getting mad at me, saying, Mark, this whole thing of having, alliances is historically accurate. It's something that's done throughout history. Yeah, that's why it's called history because it happened before. It's not currently happening now. Some other things like, slavery and killing witches and stuff, that also happened in history. We don't really do that stuff anymore, and we shouldn't do this stuff anymore either. And it's kind of, they're definitely basing it off of that, but the fact that the Federation would actively participate in that kind of practice, I don't really buy. And I think it goes against the image of the Federation. But anyway, throwing that aside for the moment, this character is absolutely horrible. I cannot stand her. She's annoying as hell. And I guess that's her whole point, but it grates on my nerves to see her on screen, even though she's actually in the right here. But leaving that aside, I can't stand to see her. And then she automatically falls in love with Kirk because, of course, she does. She's a woman on the Enterprise, on Star Trek, so of course, instantly in love with Kirk. And apparently she has these tears that when it touches someone, it acts as a love potion. So as soon as Kirk touches her tears, he's like, "I love you. You are everything to me." Yet no one's bothered to warn him or anyone about it. And in fact, once it happened, like the ambassador guy from Troyes was like, "Oh yeah, the tears, of course, that cause a man to go mad and there's no cure and he's going to be in love with him forever." I'm like, okay, thanks for actually warning him about it. Like, what the fuck? Like, why didn't you not mention anything about this? You think that would be like something like vitally important? By the way, don't touch her fucking tears because you will be madly in love with her for the rest of your life. Oh, God. Terrible episode. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into the next episode, which is the Paradise Syndrome. Now, I will not address, I have to address, but I don't want to get too much into how racist this episode is, which it is. But I think I have a similar stance to this episode as I do of Code of Honor, because I guess I'm being more gracious because I am assuming that the intent was not racist. It was more of, they wrote this episode and they wrote for people out of ignorance. And to be fair, this is very commonplace in the 60s with Westerns. I mean, if you've watched a lot of the popular movies, like the John Wayne stuff, you probably think that Westerns were very respectful to Native Americans, because a lot of those mainstream ones are. But most of these shows, like the random shows, especially the ones no one really heard of, were very extremely racist. I remember a few years ago, just flipping through cable, like my mother used to watch like these random Western shows from the 60s, and I just sat down and watched it, and I was like, oh my God, like I was just struck with how racist they were towards Native Americans. And they were basically like, "Me dumb savage, me not know," and of course played by white people, without any irony, by the way. And I'm like, what the and so seeing, putting that into the context, this episode isn't so bad, but it's still, of course, bad. It's just doing what all the shows, because here it's portraying Native Americans as in a way that's not at all accurate. And it's funny because they list off all these specific tribes, and I was like, oh, that's accurate to history. But then they portray them as random primitive people who worship sun gods or whatever, which is not at all accurate, and in many ways, the way these characters behave, of course, all played by Europeans, very insulting as well. It's basically portraying them as dumb primitives. So, yes, this episode is definitely racist. Which, okay, I said I wasn't going to get into it, but I really got into it. But that is a huge strike against this episode. But other than that, this episode's boring. On top of that, just leaving the racism aside, it is boring. It has this romance with Kirk. Kirk has amnesia. And he's like, oh, what does he call it? It's not Rory Kirk. It's something else Kirk. I don't know. But, and it's just really, really boring. I didn't buy his romance. I didn't buy, all the scenes with him tromping around, and then Spock is trying to destroy the asteroid, and McCoy's being an asshole to him the whole time. The one saving grace, despite the fact that I hated this episode and I thought it was racist, I thought it was boring, I thought it was dumb. When they get to the ending scene where Kirk has to say goodbye to his wife who's dying after he regained his memories, it was actually sad. I couldn't believe I actually felt emotion that would actually work. I actually thought that was a very powerful scene, despite the fact the rest of the episode sucked. So I will give it a hint of credit for that one scene, but that's it. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into damn, again. Actually, no, this one's okay. The next episode is Enterprise Incident, which it's not as good as I remember it being. It's not as good as I think a lot of other people. I think this episode is kind of boring, too. This episode is kind of celebrated as being good or decent by some people anyway, and because this is when Kirk, acts completely out of character, and yet everyone on the ship actually buys it. It's he's acting like a total asshole to everyone. You know what? It's funny though. While I was watching this episode, and because Kirk was yelling at Chekhov for stupid shit, and Chekhov's made a minor mistake, he's oh yeah, let's try to do better next time, idiot, or something. He's just chastising and being a total asshole to everyone. And it was funny because what I remember thinking to myself was, hey, he's acting like Captain Jellicoe. Who, by the way, objectively speaking, again, just to remind everyone, terrible captain. Anyone who says he's a good captain is objectively wrong. He is a bad captain, and that's exactly how Kirk was behaving as a terrible captain. I was but he's acting like Jellicoe. But anyway, get it done. Anyway, and Riker was right. Riker was totally right. Anyway, sorry, this is my TNG discussion. Yeah, this episode's kind of boring too because this focuses too much on the romance between the Romulan commander and Spock. Now, I think it's isn't this such a great idea? They're having a woman being the captain of the enemy ship. Isn't that so progressive? But then, really, they just did it so that she could crush on Spock, which is kind of undermines it, It's just there so she can, hit on a man. And most of this episode pertains to that, and I find it boring. And I find, the subterfuge that Kirk does in this episode kind of lazily written. It's kind of obvious that he's putting on an act, and it's obvious what they're up to. And when Shatner does his hammy over acting, yelling at the Romulans, "You do as I say!" And it's so obvious that he's putting on an act, and so it's not even good from that perspective. But they steal the cloaking device, and Kirk puts on Romulan makeup, so it's okay. It's okay, but it's mostly boring. Anyway, next, let's get back into the crap. Next episode is And the Children Shall Lead. Alright, so to be fair, this episode was not quite as terrible as I remember it being, but it's still not good. Because it actually started out really interesting. Like the fact that they went to this planet and all the adults died and the children don't give a shit, which is a good hook. It's a good mystery, and it's also really, really interesting how there was a funeral and Kirk was expecting them to be sad, but they were just giggling and laughing and didn't fucking care. In fact, when they were on the ship, whenever they brought up their parents, the kids would go out of their way to change the subject to talk about something fun and light. Now, there's a very interesting story to be had there about trauma and avoidance of trauma and how people avoid trauma and how people deal with trauma. But of course, this episode wasn't about that. It was about this funky little alien guy who comes up and goes, "Hail, hail, fire and stone," and then the kids go like this to control people and make them see daggers and shit, which is stupid. So, no credit to this episode given. It could have been good, but of course, let's go for stupid schlock instead. Anyway, next episode is everyone's favorite episode, the fan favorite, the best episode of the entire series according to everyone ever, Spocks Brain. Now, it's funny, I gotta bring up, when I did my top 10 worst episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise, and every week I released a different video with my top, each, list in my top 10, starting with 10, going to 9, 8. And there's this one guy, every single video that I put out, every week, would be like, Spocks Brain, Spocks Brain, Spocks Brain. And especially when I got into my top 3, I'm like, my number 3 worst, my number 2 worst, and my number 1 worst. He was loud as ever. He was like, these episodes are nowhere near as bad as Spocks Brain. But here's the thing, and Spocks Brain wasn't on my list. So here's the thing. I kind of like Spocks Brain. It's a terrible, terrible episode. There is no doubt about it. But I really do think this is the definition of so bad it's good. Now, to be fair, there's some, I feel that way about the Voyager episode, The Fight. Yet I still put that as my second worst episode of the entire franchise, even though I get enjoyment from watching it because it's so bad it's good. But here's the thing with Spocks Brain. And this is probably has to do with the way I saw it. I first saw this episode when I was 10, 11 years old. And I was watching it repeatedly when I was 11, 12, 13. And so that was my overexposure to this episode. And I actually kind of liked it when I was that age because it's kind of if you look at it from the perspective of a kid's show, like a cartoon, that's supposed to be goofy and aimed towards kids, it kind of works. It kind of makes sense. Because if you look at the episode itself, it actually flows and has an intelligent story and it was not intelligent, but a workable story, a story that works, that has to progress good, and it has good character interaction, it has a hook, and it's very, intense, and it has suspense. And if you watch silly cartoons, say Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which I was really into at the same time, where they had this machine was a talking brain with a mouth going, Shredder, give me a new body. And, of course, if you try to, reason that and has that as a serious drama aimed at adults, it's going to come off as silly nonsense and not work. And that's mainly why I think people don't like Spocks Brain, because they're looking at it through the lens of this is supposed to be a serious sci-fi show for adults, which, to be fair, it is. And especially what it was, aimed at. But I actually find if you look at it through the lens and you completely jump 100% into suspension of disbelief, like the way you would like a fantasy cartoon or something with a bunch of nonsense in it. You'd be like, yeah, it's just, I'm not taking it seriously. It's just a silly cartoon. Then this episode kind of works. Now you might say, be like, Mark, you can say that for any terrible episode of Star Trek. No, actually, that's not true. Most of the worst episodes, all the ones that were in my top 10, have writing flaws and don't make any sense, and have nonsense within the storytelling, and characters acting out of character and bullshit happening. That's just, well, this one does have bullshit happening. That's just dumb. But I don't know. There's a difference to me, in my opinion. Like most of the bad Star Trek shows, you can't just, if you look at it as a lens of this is a cartoon that you're not meant to take seriously, they don't work. Like Dr. Crusher having sex with the Space Ghost, like that's does not work. This, I think I've seen cartoons with very similar plots. They steal someone's brain and they have to go and take it back. Oh my god, but again, the so bad is good aspect is so hammy in such a perfect way. I'm sorry, I enjoy this episode. the way the woman who steals Spocks Brain, like, brain and brain, what is brain? And the way, again, Shatner doing some of his best hammy performances, because great leader. I mean, how could you not enjoy this episode? I mean, I suppose if you use logic and try to find some sort of realism in this episode, that's going to trip you up. But it's just a ball of nonsense and it's so much fun. So, to be fair, yes, a terrible episode. I'm not saying that it's not. But one of the worst? I'm sorry. Like, for me, one of the worst episodes of the entire franchise is something that grates on my nerves, that I think is actively insults my intelligence. Well, this one kind of does too, but still, that I just cannot stand to watch. And that does not, this episode does not fall for that for me. There are some at the end of this season, which did in fact make my top 10 worst, which I do feel are way worse than this episode for reasons I will get into. But anyway, Spocks Brain. Let's go ahead and move over to the next episode, which is there in truth? Is there in truth? So beauty. So. Sorry. That's pretty much my review of this episode. It's fine, I guess. Like the Medusan, you look on it and it goes mad, but then there's this guy who comes on board who's with Dr. Pulaski, who's hot in this episode, and of course so Kirk and fucking McCoy are like frothing and drooling all over her. Like, that kind of annoys me, like how the men have no fucking self-control in this show. Like when they see a hot chick, they just go and this episode is kind of like a really terrible example of that. But anyway, this guy comes on board with her who is very clearly like the bad guy. He's very clearly insane, and at one point, what's her face has Dr. Pulaski has like telepathic abilities, I guess, and she's able to sense that someone in the room is thinking of murder. Oh no, who could it be? It's that guy! Of course it's fucking that guy! Like, obviously. and so then he goes crazy and tries to kill Medusa, and because he sees the Medusa, he goes crazy and acts crazy shit, and he puts this Enterprise in some weird dimension that it's trapped in. Like, how the fuck did he do this? I don't know. Plot convenience. Anyway, and so only the Medusan can get them out of it, and so Spock has to mind meld with the Medusan. Of course, Dr. Pulaski doesn't want him to do this. She's very jealous. They established this, so Kirk, of course, hits on her to distract her because, of course, any woman who comes on the Enterprise has to think Kirk is hot and fall for his shit. But anyway, I mean, I've heard some arguments, people trying to say Kirk was not a womanizer. Don't give me that shit. Watch the show again. Watch episodes like this. He is definitely the worst womanizer. Like, they try to say McCoy was worse. No, McCoy just likes to drool over women, but Kirk is the one who actually, was the bimbo, but who slept around. But anyway, yeah, and Spock mind melds with the Medusan, and when he goes to put the Medusan back, he just absentmindedly forgets to put his fucking goggles on. What a cheap way to create tension. But anyway, I mean, it's not a bad episode. I don't know. I don't think there's much there. I think it's boring. Anyway, next episode is The Empath. Well, I could do my whole sleeping routine again for this episode, to be honest, and this episode is definitely worse. Yeah, it's funny because there is a group of people who love this episode, and I cannot understand why. Not that it's like a terrible episode, but I don't find it to be particularly interesting in any way, shape, or form. It's mostly boring. I mean, when I did my full-length review to it, I talked about how they played up the camaraderie between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and as someone who did like this episode commented saying, yes, that's exactly why I like this episode. But for me, I don't think, they didn't do enough to justify it. And this episode is mostly just aliens torturing people for 45 minutes. They come here and they torture this empath who can't speak, and then they torture Kirk and Spock and McCoy, and they killed the humans who were there on the planet. And I do think that scene where it was one of the most eerie, creepy scenes in Star Trek, actually, when Kirk, Spock, and McCoy beam down to this abandoned, it's already eerie and creepy. It's this abandoned outpost, and they're watching the videotape of the two men getting snatched away, as this weird sound goes and snatches them away. And as soon as they finish watching that tape, that exact same sound happens, and they start, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy get snatched away one at a time. That's freaky shit. That creeped me the fuck out. I remember that scaring the hell out of me. But that's where the interesting part of this episode ends, because the rest of the episode, they're just getting tortured by these aliens for 45 minutes. These aliens are really, I don't buy their motivation. They want to prove that the species worth saving, so they had to have this one woman out of a species of, assumably at least millions, you would assume. So they're just going to judge an entire race of millions of people. Imagine aliens coming to Earth and judging the entire, all of the United States, all of Europe, all of China, all of, all Africa, Asia, all the Pacific Islands off of one random guy named Joe in Ohio. Joe, you're going to do everything right, otherwise your species is going to die. That's dumb! Why would you do that? Anyway, so... and then, McCoy sacrifices himself for that, which I thought was, Kirk and Spock and McCoy fighting over who gets to die. I don't know. Didn't they already do that? Already did that in the Immunity Syndrome episode, which also sucked. But anyway, Yeah, and how they Kirk moralizes to them. Like Kirk gets the better of them, but then he throws the weapons down and moralizes to them. These fuckers had been torturing them for hours and holding them captive, and Kirk still tries to reason with them. I don't know. It's something about it is really irritating, and I find it boring to sit there and watch aliens torture them for hours. Anyway, and it's funny because a lot of TV stations would not air this episode in syndication, particularly in the UK and certain countries, and I can see why. This is really dark, twisted stuff to have on Monday night at 6. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into the next episode, which is the Tholian Web. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Tholian Web, for finally coming and being a good episode. Anyway, so yeah, this is a classic, I think, for good reason. I did a full-length review for this episode, and the Tholian Web itself is really impractical. Why don't the Tholians just blow up the Enterprise? Why are they gonna take hours and hours to make this elaborate web in order to destroy the ship? Just shoot it. What's the point of in Enterprise? I guess they try to retcon it because they in the Mirror Darkly, the Tholians made the web super fast, and so that kind of made sense. And maybe that's how they were supposed to go originally, but since the Tholian ships were damaged, we're going super slow. But anyway, so you have the I love the concept of the Tholians, and I talked before about how the fucking new Trek needs to do Tholians. Needs! Anyway, we should have gotten more Tholians by now. Why have we not gotten more Tholians by now? But anyway, there's actually 3 plots in this episode. There's the Tholians, there's this disease that's causing everyone to go insane randomly, and then there's Kirk, who's caught in this interphasic space. And they're thinking that Kirk is dead, and so they have a funeral for him. I think the way that these 3 plots actually work together is brilliant. Because a lot of times when, especially with TNG and Voyager, they have several plots now have nothing to do with each other and just there to take up time. But these plots work in tangent with each other to ramp up the tension. It's Kirk's dead. No, he's floating in space. Where is Kirk? And then Chekhov fucking goes insane, tries to start killing people. And then there's meanwhile these 2 Tholian ships creating a web around him that's gonna fucking kill the ship. That's tension upon tension upon tension. All really works for me. Now the whole scene with there being a last recording of Kirk for Spock and McCoy, and it just so happens you're probably watching this, you're in the heat of battle and things are high. I'm actually, that's very unlikely that would be the scenario in which they'd be watching that tape, but whatever. He just can predict the future, I guess. But overall, yeah, really loved that. Really good episode. Thank God for a good episode. Anyway, next episode I'll get to is For the World is Hollow and I Have Touched the Sky. And then I went out to the store to buy some bread, but they didn't have any bread, so I had to go to another store and get a different kind of bread. I wanted to get rye bread, but all they had was sourdough, and then I came back home and watched some Star Trek. Yeah, that's my making fun of how fucking long the title of this episode is. But anyway, I actually kind of like this episode. This is another episode I know a lot of people aren't very big on, and they think it's kind of silly. I did a full-length review for this not that long ago as well, and it kind of works for me, The concept of them being this civilization, of course, the Orville ripped it off, so they liked this concept too. Where there's this alien civilization their planet was dying, so they went on this ship, and they disguised as an asteroid so they could live, but they had been on it for so long that they forgot that they're actually on a ship and they think it's their homeworld. Like, that's actually a very interesting concept. And as for McCoy's storyline of having a year to live and then falling in love with what's-her-face on the planet, like, okay, so him having 1 year to live, that was just like thrown in there for plot convenience and immediately erased at the end of the episode for plot convenience so things can go back to normal. Barring that, I actually buy the romance with McCoy and what's-her-face. Now, granted, they just met each other and knew each other for like 5 minutes before they decide that they love each other madly and want to spend the rest of their lives together. But here's the thing. Here's why I buy it. The rest of McCoy's life is a year. So I buy that he would want to spend the 1 year that he has left alive with a really hot chick who has the hots for him, rather than, on a sterile ship treating skim elbows or whatever. I mean, I'd fucking do that too. So, I mean, a really hot chick who's madly in love with me and wanted to spend a passionate year with me, I'd choose that over being a freaking doctor on a starship. I mean, for sure. So, I do buy that. And I do think, of course, it has the evil supercomputer, which is, a trope that the original series has gone to way too often. So, to me, that's probably the weakest part of the episode. But it is interesting how the relationship with it and how McCoy agrees to be ruled by the supercomputer because he wants to, be with this hot chick for a year. And the sort of relationships, the society that they have, because she has more privilege because she's their leader, so she's able to marry an outsider and stuff like this, and how they try to have to convince her to go against the supercomputer because they try to convince her what the reality is. Like, that's all really interesting stuff. So don't get me wrong, I don't think this episode is like a masterpiece or anything. It's not like an amazing episode, but it's good. Like, it's decent. I liked it. I enjoyed it. I think it's a good episode. Anyway, we'll get into the next episode, which is Day of the Dove. I really appreciate this episode as well. This is one I always liked as a kid, so I think I have some nostalgia for this. But this is one of the... I call this the first real Klingon episode. It's with King, and the Klingons actually acting like Klingons for once. They still don't look like them, but they're acting like them. More of what we come to know as Klingons, rather than being like these Ferengi slimy ghosts. My dear Captain Kirk. Like, I talked about that in season 2, and that fucking annoys me. But they actually have that, like, the honor code, and they feel like they have their own system, and they're not just these generic evil people. In fact, the whole point of the episode is that there's an alien that feeds off of the hate and is feeding the hate, and of course there's commentary about how hate fuels war and war is bad overall, which is a really good commentary that the original series does, and does it well. And I love how our Starfleet people, they're the ones who fucking Chekhov almost rapes a Klingon woman. I mean, that's I don't know, maybe that's too far, but I do like how our heroes are the ones who start acting like bad guys. And then the bad guys, are they really bad guys? Or are they just, no, it's not really good guys and bad guys. It's just pointless fighting that they need to stop. And I like that. I think it works. So anyway, we'll get into the next episode, which is... Plato's Stepchildren. We couldn't stay with good episodes for too long. We gotta go back to some crap every once in a while. Now, again, this episode's not quite as bad as I remember it being, but again, it's kind of boring. It's Kirk, Spock, and McCoy get to this planet with these people with telekinetic powers, and they're all powerful and they're very arrogant, and they want to force McCoy to stay there against his will, and so they start torturing Kirk and Spock and make them move stuff. Apparently they have their telekinetic abilities apparently include the ability to make Kirk and Spock sing, going, I'm Tweedledee and Tweedledum, like, that's so dumb. That's so stupid. Like, why would they do that? I guess the point is, of course, to humiliate them, but still, it's like so goofy. And again, it's kind of like similar to Empath, where it's just like they're just aliens torturing Kirk and Spock and McCoy for 45 minutes. Why is that interesting to me? It's not. And then they force Kirk and Uhura to kiss against their will. Now, everyone makes a big deal about this being one of the first interracial kisses, but it's a non-consensual kiss. These two aren't actually in love with each other, so it kind of deflates it, but, you know, it's non-consensual on Kirk's part as well, of course. It's the telekinetic people who are forcing them to do it, but still, it's like, I don't know. This episode's not good. So, let's go ahead and get into the next episode, which is Wink of an Eye. And, yeah, this episode's okay. I kind of sounded like the noise that those people who are in the hives, they go, I was kind of doing that. That's what I think this episode is okay. So the Voyager Blink of an Eye is far superior to this, but anyway, it's not that similar. It's a race of beings who exist in a different state of time because they move at a much faster rate, and so they can be in the same spot as Kirk and crew, but no one can see them because they exist at a different time, which is an interesting concept. And of course, you know, the main woman alien, her main objective is to bang Kirk, because of course it is. And she, by the way, accomplishes that goal, which the episode hints at by showing Kirk put his boot back on, which was actually considered really risque in the 60s. But anyway, his boot was off. I guess that meant he had sex. But anyway, yeah, she's like really like foaming over Kirk this whole episode. That's a bit ridiculous. But anyway, why do these aliens, like, I don't really get why they want to, like, freeze the Enterprise and steal members of the ship one by one so they can have a gene pool and be able to breed, because they had issues in their own world with not being able to breed. So they lure an alien ship in, freeze it in time, and then make out with its, you know, people. And I love how this random ensign was like so convinced and like turned evil so fast, but whatever. But I don't really get like how at the end when Kirk foils their plan, he doesn't like try to send Starfleet to help them. He said, "Oh, we'll send Starfleet to help you," but they don't do any of that. They just assume that they died. And I was like, "Oh well, fuck them, they're dead now, who cares, and we're not even going to attempt to save them in any other way." But whatever. But as I said, this episode was fun. Anyway, we'll get into the next episode, which is That Which Survives, and I kind of like this episode. A lot of people, I think, hate it. I've heard a lot of bad things about this episode. I kind of like it. I don't think it's great, but I think it's kind of an interesting. I think it's an effective horror episode, to be clear. That, you know, Kirk Sulu and McCoy, and I love how it's Sulu for once, because they have to have Spock on the Enterprise in command being a total asshole to everyone. I do think Spock is out of character in this episode. Whoever was writing for him turned up his sort of obtuseness to emotions to 1,000 and made him a huge asshole. When Scotty would say something like, "Oh, that would be my best guess," and Spock's like, "Well, I would suggest you not waste your time with guessing," and Spock knows what that means. He's just being a total asshole. And in fact, at the end of the episode when Scotty saves the ship, Spock is still lecturing him. It's I don't understand, Mr. Scott. Why would you remember? He's being so obtuse in this episode. But anyway, I was talking about how I like it. Oh yeah, so Sulu and Kirk and McCoy are trapped on this planet, and there's this image of this woman who appears, and they say, "I am for you." And I like the disconnect, how the woman isn't aware that she is killing people. It's basically a security system that was left on hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago after this race had died off, which something I do find kind of darkly ironic in a really good way. Is part of why I like this episode. But anyway, yeah, so she all she has to do is touch someone when they die, and of course she kills off Red Shirt Joe, even though he's wearing a blue shirt. It was Giamato or something. But he's not a main character, and he's down with the main character, so he's dead. And but then she almost kills Sulu, but then they realize that if they block their way, if the person they're not for, it was effectively scary. I thought it was creepy, and I thought the Enterprise was on its way for utter destruction. That was creepy as well. So I thought this episode was fine. There's nothing great about it. It's pretty simple. But I like it. I don't see all the hate for it. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into the next episode, which is Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. A classic episode that a lot of people love. It's very on the nose about its commentary on racism, but it's still really good commentary. I love the simplicity. I love how simple it is and how on the nose it is. Someone is black on one side and white on the other, and the other is white on one side, black on the other, and to them it's well, of course they're of a superior or inferior race. I'm the superior race. Obviously, because I'm black on this side. And as an outsider, they'd be you guys kind of look the same. And it's something I kind of identify with a lot as being dyslexic, because I can't even tell my right from left. And so I can't even tell the difference between the two fuckers. So, and I think that's actually very powerful commentary on how frivolous and pointless racism is. And it all boils down to tribalism. Which we get in this episode. The commissioner does come off as your typical Southern racist, and I do like that. And but the other guy is a bit of this rebel who wants to get everyone stirred up, and I don't know if I care for that aspect of it, or think that's relevant to the commentary, but. Still a good episode. I think it has one of the most intense moments where Kirk decides to set the self-destruct because the commissioner has taken over his ship and refuses. He wants to go to Alderaan to take his prisoner there, and Kirk is on this mercy mission to this planet to save a bunch of people. And so he's like, look, you gotta go. We gotta go to this planet to save the people. If you don't let me go there, I'm gonna destroy my ship. And the guy's like, yeah, whatever, you're bluffing. You're not gonna destroy a ship. And so you go through this whole sequence, which is shot really well. It's shot reminds me of The Good, Bad, the Ugly, because it focuses on someone's mouth and someone's eyes, and Scotty has very bad teeth. But anyway, that's my takeaway from this episode. But as they all like do out their say their codes for the self-destruct, which was duplicated in Star Trek II: The Search for Spock. They honored this and did pretty much the same codes, except of course Spock wasn't there. Chekhov was there instead. But anyway, very intense scene. Absolutely loved it. But then later in the episode, after they went to the rescue mission, the commissioner's just like, oh yeah, I disabled your self-destruct, whatever, now we're going to Alderaan. And Kirk's like, fine, we'll go there. Like, that that seemed a bit anticlimactic. I mean, I guess the main thing is, yes, they did go to their mercy mission and save a bunch of people's lives, so he's less willing to destroy the ship over the fact that guys took over. Okay, but still, it seemed really anticlimactic. And then the whole thing with the two guys like going to the planet and finding everyone dead. I don't know. I thought that was a little bit silly. And then they beamed down and started running around the planet, and the Kirk is like, oh, well, they just want to sit there in their hate, so I'm just going to leave them there. Fuck them. But anyway, I don't know. I guess there was a darkness to that ending, but I partly find it a little bit silly as well. But anyway, let's go ahead and move over to the next episode, which is Whom Gods Destroy. I am a Lord, Garth. I love this episode. I know a lot of people either think this episode's just okay or not very good. I love it. It's always been one of my favorite episodes. In fact, I can guarantee you this is going to be my top 10 best episodes. It is one of my favorite episodes of the original series. I love this episode. It has all these lines that I love to quote all the time. Like, I love Lord Garth. And I'll say this. And I said it before. Lord Garth is the best villain the original series had. Fuck Khan. Now, granted, Khan was great in the Wrath of Khan, but they couldn't bring back Lord Garth because that actor had passed away by the 80s. But, they probably wouldn't have anyway. But they should have, because he was a better villain than Khan. I think he's easily the best villain of the original series, and this is one of the most suspenseful Battle of Wits episode in the entire show. Now, I love the concept of there being an insane asylum and Kirk and Spock being trapped in this madhouse where the inmates is taken over. And there's a really sort of fucked up, creepy aspect to it in the way he goes, silence! and he's obviously insane the way he creates a throne. He just puts a chair on top of the table. It's like, this is my throne, and has a crown, and they had this ceremony. But he is deadly. He's torturing the governor there. He's torturing Kirk. He ends up just randomly killing that Orion girl for no good reason. So there's a really dark sense of real danger amongst this silliness, and how this used to be a good man, a good starship commander, and but he's went through an accident and now is suffering, but through that he's causing all this mayhem, which I thought was very intense. And again, as I said, there's a lot of lines in this episode I always quote where it was like, so you expect us to grovel like ants and some less of an anthill, but I am not an insect. I am a Lord God. Or something I always say when I want my dog or someone else's dog to leave my room. I always go, remove this animal! I'm sure there's other lines too I quote, because I think he's so quotable. I think he's just such a fascinating villain. I'm Lord Garth. Master of the universe, and apparently, by the way, Captain. I don't know. I can't think of all the other lines, but God, I love this episode. And plus, they have random aliens we've seen before. They got Andorians and Tellarites and Ryans. I don't know. It's just, to me, this feels like a unique Star Trek episode and a very intense one. I love it. I don't care what anyone else says. Because I'm Lord Garth. Anyway. Let's go ahead and get into the next episode, which is The Mark of Gideon. I'm going to do my sleeping routine again. This episode's boring. God, it was so boring. I literally fell asleep when watching this episode. And to be honest, I didn't go back and watch the whole thing. I just watched part of it because it's so boring. And it's a dumb concept. Okay, so there's a world that's overcrowded. And so much so when this is revealed at the end of the episode, like you see all the people like crammed into each other, just randomly standing in the ground like this, because it's meant to be like a paradise, but it was such a paradise that no one ever died, and so many people wanted to live there that it got like too overcrowded. Which, yeah, I can see the commentary there with like California and stuff like that, where way too many people moved out there because it was seen as like, you know, a desirable place to be, and then they couldn't really, you know, like people moved to Los Angeles and they can't afford it and they end up going broke or whatever. Here's the thing. So the whole premise of the episode is Kirk goes to beam down to this planet, but instead he's on the Enterprise is like empty and everyone's vanished, and so they make you think that everyone just disappeared, but then you find out Not that long. They don't keep you waiting too long. But you find out that Kirk actually beamed down to a duplicate of the Enterprise. So they could trick him into like getting this disease from him by having this chick, you know, hit on him, of course, obviously, and so they could get this disease, so they can introduce this disease into the population in order to kill people, so there won't be so overcrowded. That was their main like plot. So, and because they can't, you know, have abortions because that's out of the question, but then instead they would rather release a virus that will kill people. Yeah, that's you know, totally reasonable. Anyway, so or even birth control for that matter. But yeah, let's release a virus that will kill people. But anyway, so how were they able to create an exact duplicate of the Enterprise that duplicates it so perfectly that its own captain, who knows the ship inside and out, would be completely fooled and believe that he's still on the Enterprise? I thought this planet was overcrowded. You have all these people going like this and not even be able to move. So where the fuck did they get out of this space to create this replica? And well, hey, why don't they use that space to put some people in so they're not so fucking overcrowded? Like, I don't know. I don't know. This episode really falls apart the more you think about it. But hey, Kirk got it on again, so. Anyway, next episode is Lights of Zatir. I think I remember kind of liking this episode when I was a teenager, but I don't recall it very clearly. I do think, like, when coming into this episode, I expected it to be bad. From what I heard of it, and from what it sounds like, and what I can vaguely recall from it. But, you know, when I started watching it, I was like, hey, this is actually a really interesting episode. I like the character of Lieutenant Romaine. I mean, of course, they have to have a man, you know, drooling all over her, because this is the original series, and they just have to. You cannot have any intelligent, smart female character without a man there drooling over her the whole time. But anyway, in this case, at least this case is Scotty and not fucking Kirk. But anyway, so I liked her character, and I think it was really interesting that they just randomly focused on this, and this she was an intelligent, capable Starfleet officer who just joined the Enterprise, and Kirk was, you know, worried about her well-being because she got, you know, attacked by these lights and was having these recurring visions that predicting death. And I was like, yeah, so that's like, it's effectively creepy. It's a good horror cell. It has an interesting, unique character. So what's the problem here? Well, the problem here is it gets halfway through the episode, like, it's really intense when they go to Memory Alpha, by the way, which I didn't realize that's where that wiki gets its name from. There's a library in this episode called Memory Alpha, which is supposed to be like the greatest library, the galaxy that lights of Zatir. Like, they kill everyone there. Of course they do. Which I didn't realize that's where they got it, that wiki got its name from. But anyway, so that was a creepy sequence when they killed everyone in Memory Alpha, and that Remain could predict it. But then they get into this goofy plot of the lights of Zatir going, "We're gonna kill you." And the last 20 minutes of this episode is basically Remain floating in this, tube chamber going woo, 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 and Kirk, Spock, and McCoy standing over and going, "It's working, it's killing them." That is so boring. And so it started out good, it started out creepy, it started out with an interesting character story, and then it just got dumb and boring and silly, and so it kind of lost me. So overall, it's not that good of an episode. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into the next episode, which is the Cloud Miners. Now, this is an episode I've always liked, and I still like it, and I still think it's great, probably even more so because of the social commentary I think is very relevant that it has about class inequality, class warfare, and how the upper class mistreats the worker class, and it's a bit on the nose, but it does so in a very effective, very realistic way. I love Kirk's and Spock's interaction with this society, trying to navigate it. I think it's great that Kirk is being the reasonable one, trying to find a practical solution, but no one's willing to listen to him, not on either side, so Kirk has to force the situation. I think the conflict between the magistrate, who is an effective asshole character, and Kirk, and I love how Kirk gets the better of him at the end. Like, all of this works for, and it has a really strong female character. Who men are not drooling over. Oh my god! They're not. But they do, of course, have a scene where Kirk is like lying in bed with her and kind of like forcing himself. Well, not really, but she tried to kill him, and he's like holding her down, and he's like, "Oh, I kind of like this." I'm like, "Kirk, that's so inappropriate. I know she just tried to kill you, but still, come on." But anyway, other than that, very strong character, intelligent character, well fleshed out character, really interesting plot, strong social commentary. I think this is another one of my favorite episodes of the original series. Absolutely loved it. So there we go. This is another one I think a lot of people sleep on. When I'm talking about some of these third season episodes I think are great, that a lot of people are like, this is definitely one of them. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into the next episode, which is... Alright, so remember how at the start of the video I talked about how there's, at the end of the season, it's a great episode, and a shitty episode, and a great episode, and an absolute crap, and a great episode, and an absolute crap. Well, we started that cycle now, because we had the great episode of the Cloud Miners, and that is followed by Stepping Into Eden. Yay, brother. And again, this is going by production order. But anyway, this was in my top 10 worst episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise. This is number 10. I'll get to number 6 shortly. So... yes, this episode is absolutely fucking ridiculous and annoying that they have hippies running around the Enterprise going, "Don't go, don't go!" But the main reason why I hate this episode so much is because it is very crystal clear that this is putting down the hippie movement and criticizing in the worst possible way and portraying them as a bunch of moronic youths who don't know what the fuck they're talking about, who should just shut the fuck up and support the Vietnam War, because people who are doing the Vietnam War know what they're doing. And you guys, and fuck equality, like, let's fuck all the protests that bring about racial equality and brought about, stronger rights for the workers. We don't need any of that shit. Just shut the fuck up, you stupid teens, and step in line! That is clearly the point of this episode, and that is commentary that I think is objectively wrong, false, and I could not disagree with it more. And on top of that, we have to listen to this bullshit songs that are so dumb, with Kirk, Spock doing a solo, and why are they playing this music over the intercom where like random red shirts are in the bridge going like, it is so dumb. God damn. Fuck this episode. Just fuck it. Just roll it up in a ball and throw it out the window and smash it and step on it and like kick it around and shit. It sucks. Anyway. Let's go ahead and get into the next episode. which is got a very pretentious title. Requiem for Methuselah, or however you pronounce it. I'm positive, 100% positive I did not pronounce that correctly, and I don't care. Methuselah. In my head, whenever I see the title, I always pronounce it as Requiem for Methuselah. I don't care how it's pronounced. Anyway, I know I'm going to come off as ignorant to a lot of people, but stop giving me pretentious titles. Although, to be fair, Discovery still has the most pretentious titles out of any Star Trek show, or at least their first season or second season. I think the third and fourth were not as bad, but anyway. But in the shows in general, Orphan Black clearly has got the most pretentious episode titles of any show ever. Anyway, I like this episode. This is another one I think people sleep on. Now, again, because I said you get a great episode, then it's crap, then great. Well, this isn't really great. It's good. I admit it's not a fantastic episode, but then it's sandwiched between, two absolute pieces of crap, and it's actually a good episode. I think it is. This is another one I think people either don't like or think is mediocre. This used to be one of my favorite episodes. I used to put this in my top 10 original series all the time. Now, when I was a teenager, I don't like it as much anymore because, being fair and examining the episode, the whole plot with Kirk making out and having a passionate romance with an android was dumb. And out of nowhere, like, they're talking, like, at the end of this episode, I always thought it was, like, really powerful the way that Kirk was, like, so heartbroken and Spock was like, forget. And because he was being a good friend. But he knew her for, like, 5 seconds. And all of a sudden he's like so passionately in love with her, like that. Like, I love you, love me, come to the Enterprise with me. Like, none of that was like the least bit earned. And how he was like fighting that Flint guy and he was like, we're fighting over a woman. Like, that was so cheesy. So that's why I don't like this episode as much as I used to. But I still love the the plot of it, that they had this plague and they're like desperately need this medicine. They beam down to this planet that they think is uninhabited, but this like dude shows up who's very powerful and has this superior technology and like is being an asshole and tries to stand in their way, and they're like desperately trying to get this medicine, and then they find out that this dude, he starts being nice to them, but then we find out he has ulterior motives for that, and he keeps delaying the medicine because he has ulterior motives to do that, and that's all very interesting to me. And then the kicker, like the big reveal, is that he's actually an immortal who's been alive, who's from Earth, who's been alive for thousands of years. And I find that a very interesting concept. It's kind of hard to buy that he's actually Leonardo da Vinci and Brahms. And apparently, like, the screenplay writer originally wanted to make him Jesus as well, but the network would not go for that, which I understand that's a bit controversial. But it's a very interesting concept, and I think this actor did a really good job, and I think his sort of back and forth battle of wits with Kirk was really interesting as well. And I find the high tension, high stakes, and a fascinating intellectual concept. So I really enjoy this episode. Now, I will note that the person who wrote the screenplay for this episode always had this idea and eventually made a movie kind of based off of this episode, which was about someone who was immortal having a conversation. He worked at as a professor at a college, and he was leaving the college, and he had like a dinner party with all of his colleagues, other professors there, and admitted, hey, guess what? I'm immortal. And he reveals that he is Jesus. So they were able to pull that aspect into this, and that movie was a made for TV. It was shown on the Sci-Fi Channel, so it wasn't like a huge budget or anything. In fact, the entire movie took place in one room, so it was a really low budget movie. But it was a decent movie. I actually thought it was really interesting. It actually had a couple of Star Trek alumni in it, such as John Billingsley, who does Dr. Phlox, and Tony Todd, Kern, and the future Jake Sisko was in it. And I think it came out in the early 2000s sometime, and it was okay. And it was interesting. It was based in the, so the guy actually finally got to do this, idea as a movie. So I always thought that was, and it was kind of based off of the script. So I thought that was pretty interesting as well. But anyway, I always remember this. I remember when I first saw this episode as a teenager, like I never heard of it because no one ever talks about this episode. It's like no one cares about this one. And when they revealed, like the guy revealed, hey, I'm an immortal. I've been around for thousands of years. I was like, that blew my mind. I'm like, really? Kirk meets like fucking Da Vinci? Like, how could people not talk about this? But Janeway does mention that in Voyager, to be fair. Anyway, that Kirk claims to have met Leonardo da Vinci. But anyway, yeah, I mean, it's not a great episode. As I said, the romance is cheesy, but I kind of like it. I think it's a pretty good episode. So then, we get into the next episode, which is back to crap, back to Saturn, back to Sirius. Stop it, Phoebe. And that's an Expanse reference. But anyway, great episode, crap. Great episode, crap. Savage Curtain. Abraham Lincoln is floating in space on his chair in space, and the view screen where Kirk and the crew is talking to Abraham Lincoln in space. And then Abraham Lincoln beams on the ship, and they give him presidential honors, and they take him around the ship, and then they beam down to the planet, and they have a battle between Sirach, the great, it actually introduced in this episode, the greatest Vulcan of all time, Kirk, Spock, Abraham Lincoln, Genghis Khan. They have a fight against Genghis Khan and other made-up historical figures. It's so stupid. It's so dumb. This is such a terrible episode. It's just Abraham Lincoln floating in space. Now this hurts my brain. This is not a Spocks Brain scenario. So bad it's good. There's nothing good about it. This is just no. This is just no. This is just no. Like, I don't care if you put it in the context of a kid's show. This is just no. This is a flat out no. This is so dumb. Alright. Okay? So apparently this episode was originally meant to be like commentary on the nature, like criticizing television and nature, how it, riles up, pits people against each other. And I suppose the bread and circus is probably the same type of thing. Trying to criticize modern television. But it didn't really, play that way. Apparently in the rewrites, they wrote out most of the original intention to do that anyway. There's just one line where the alien says, "Oh, my whole planet is watching." And that's it. So it doesn't really come off as commentary for that. And why... Why would this alien reach into the minds of Kirk and Spock and bring out historical figures and have them just fight each other? And the stated purpose is to find out which is better, good or evil. I think there's much better... First of all, why would you need to test that? Secondly, there's much different ways, better ways to do that. And why, when people are coming to explore your planet and he keeps saying, "Oh, I'm just doing this to learn," just like you're exploring space. Hey, I just want to have you fight these imaginary historical figures to the death and possibly destroy your whole ship because I want to learn. What's your fucking problem? This makes no sense. It is a big ball of nonsense, crap, garbage. Fuck it. Anyway, Abraham Lincoln is floating in space. Alright, sorry. Let's move on. I mean, come on. I could buy that there's aliens who would steal Spock's brain and put it in to use it as a supercomputer, and that McCoy would have the Spock's body on remote walking down the hall to try to retrieve the brain. I buy that 1,000 times more than I buy fucking Abraham Lincoln floating in space. Anyway, let's move. So great episode, crap. Great episode, crap. So now we'll give great episode again. Thank you. All Our Yesterdays. Again, a lot of I think is an underrated gem that a lot of people sleep on. I know people, in particular, who disagree with me and don't think this episode's that good. I love it. I think it's a very unique. It's, to me, this feels like it almost exists outside the original series. It feels so unique and so distinct from the rest of the show, in the best way possible. So they go to this planet where the supernova is about to destroy the planet, and they find a librarian named Atos, A to Z. They love that shit. And they find out that people have escaped to the past, which there are some practical issues with that concept, but it's an interesting concept nonetheless. And then Kirk, Spock, and McCoy get trapped in the past, but they get trapped in different time periods. And for once, Kirk is not the one who has the fucking romance. Kirk gets in the conundrum. He goes back. Now, granted, the history of this alien planet just happens to be the Three Musketeers. And there's witches, so it's very similar to ours. But I don't begrudge it that, because we don't really have much to base alien history off of other than our own history. So, and plus, we're in a show where everyone looks like humans with crap on their foreheads and they all speak English. So I don't care. Their history is just like England. I don't mind. It doesn't bother me at all. It's interesting. And then Kirk gets trapped there, and he's accused of being a witch, but he finds a judge there who's actually a time traveler and uses him. That's interesting stuff. But what I love about this episode most is the McCoy story and Spock's storyline, which I actually think is a romance I absolutely buy, because apparently Spock, traveling thousands of years in the past, is starting to revert back to his more primal self, which is, to be fair, the only time in the entire Star Trek franchise where time travel is portrayed like this. It never is portrayed like this ever again. But, whatever. I'm still willing to go with this because I think it's a good episode. And then Spock starts falling in love, and this romance actually by. I actually felt for this romance because you could feel like Spock, and I think this is a much better romance than This Side of Paradise, by the way, which I think was a bad episode. This, I think, is a really good episode. And you can tell that Spock, because he was suppressing his emotions all this time, and he gets to, enjoy being in love, and how it's really overwhelming him, and how he loves this emotion, and how it's sort of blinding him to not wanting to go back, where McCoy is like, hey, we need to go back to our proper... I want to be on the Enterprise. I don't want to be in some fucking cave in an ice age for the rest of my life, which is fair. But Spock is so enamored in love, and Zarbeth, who is a prisoner, who's so lonely, had absolutely no company, is also enamored in having this company. It's kind of like, I feel for McCoy in this episode too, because I know what it's like to be the third wheel. He's such a third wheel in this episode. But yeah, and I think it's tragic how Spock has to leave Zarbeth behind. I think it's very fascinating that Spock gets his tragic love story. This is his city on the edge of forever. I think to me, the Spock and Zarbeth romance is just as powerful as the Edith Keeler and Kirk one. And maybe not quite as tragic, because Spock doesn't have to kill Zarbeth, but he does have to leave her behind. And that is very tragic. And I actually thought it was a very powerful episode. So I love this episode. I don't care what anyone says. So, time for crap again. And this is the final episode of the original series, Turnabout Intruder. Now, this is not the finale. It's not a series finale. It just so happens to be the last episode before the show was canceled. It's funny because when I went and read all these, I did a full-length review, because I did an hour review for this for my number 6 worst episode of all Star Trek franchise. And I read did a lot of research, read opinions, read a lot of reviews, and almost all of them just kept going on and on about how this is the last episode. But to me, my hour-long review, I mentioned that not once, because it's very inconsequential to what this episode is. It just so happens to be the last episode they were filming before they got canceled. That doesn't fucking matter. What matters is that this episode is one of the most sexist stories I've ever seen, ever. Ever. Not just Star Trek, not 60s, ever. The whole thing is about how women are not capable of being, in positions of leadership or power, and that women are naturally just in the kitchen, and they should be happy with being in the kitchen, because that's what women are. And if you're not happy with being in the kitchen, then you're just trying to be like a man, and you're not happy with being a woman because you don't know your place. You need to learn your place. And that's very clearly what this episode is about. There were several people who tried to argue it wasn't, that it's just Janice Luster was insane and trying to take Captain Kirk's position. That is totally wrong. In my hour-long review, I completely broke down in all the different ways why that reading is so incredibly false, and it's so obvious that this is about putting down the women's lib. It was a reactionary commentary against the women's lib movement. And so I don't want to go into all the detail again in this video, because I already did in the other video, but suffice to say, all the text, all the lines, if you listen to them, read them, very clear within the episode itself. But if that's not convincing enough, William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy talked about how sexist this episode was. Gene Roddenberry even apologized for it later, although his apology was kind of half-assed because he kind of downplayed just how sexist it was. But so Gene Roddenberry wrote this episode, and there's a lot of claims of issues with him being sexist. He was going through a very terrible divorce, which is no excuse for being sexist, but it's part of why, like, Janice Lister's an ex-lover of Kirk, because it's his Roddenberry's way of saying how evil his ex was, because they just want to destroy you and take what's yours. But he, of course, threw in all the social commentary about because, you know, and watching this again, it frustrates me when people try to make the argument that it's not, because it's so obvious when watching this episode through the specific lines, like Janice Lester as Kirk, and, you know, Kirk in Lester's body will say stuff like, oh, Lester's unhappy with her own womanhood because she wants a position that she did not earn through temperament, which means women cannot be in Starship Commanders. They need to stay in the fucking kitchen. And then Kirk's like, at the end of the episode, the final episode of the line of the episode is like, oh, she could have been happy if only, and he trails off, but what's implied is if only she'd learned her fucking place and stay in the kitchen. And I cannot abide that. Like, this should not be in Star Trek. This goes against everything that Star Trek stands for. I mean, this would be a terrible movie, a terrible episode of anything, but the fact that this is in Star Trek just makes it so much more egregious. And that this happens to be the final episode that they're ending the show on. And it's also, they use the word hysteria, because it's common to dismiss, especially in the 60s and 50s, to dismiss women who wanted, you know, equal rights, whatever, as being hysteric. And there was a very, you know, gaslighting term they use a lot, saying, oh, you're just hysteric, you're just hysteria. And it's no coincidence, it's the exact phrase that they use in this episode to describe Janice Lister. And on top of that, William Shatner's hammy acting, a stupid body swap storyline. Like, William Shatner's acting. I mean, they have him filing his nails. See, he's a woman. It's a woman in his body. Get it? Because they're filing his nails. This episode is so bad. It's so bad. It is so bad. So, yeah. That's why I think it's one of the worst episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise. Now, I find it's funny because I had this discussion with my sister, because I said this was the most sexist episode of the entire Star Trek franchise, and she disagrees. She thinks it's Prophet and Lace from Deep Space Nine, which was my number one worst episode of the Star Trek franchise. So I really agree with her on how terrible that episode is. But that episode has more sense than just being sexist. It's transphobic, of course, which is why, you know, she has a lot of issues with it. It's homophobic. It's not funny. And it's offensive to women, and all. It's just a terrible episode all around. So is it sexist? Absolutely. But it's a worse episode of this, and it's a more offensive episode than this, but I think not more sexist. It has way more sense than just being sexist, and it doesn't approach the level of sexist that this episode does, in my opinion. In my opinion, this is clearly the most sexist episode of the Star Trek franchise, and one of the most sexist pieces of fiction I've ever seen, ever. Like, I can't think of anything I've seen that's more sexist than this. Although there's some few contenders out there. But yeah, and it's not only, and for me that is enough to make this like the worst episode of the show. That because we shouldn't have a sexist episode in the original series. But then everything else about it sucks too. The whole William Shatner, I will come and you, like, although I do like using that screenshot where he goes like, it is a funny screenshot of showing how ridiculous his acting is. But anyway, so that's it. Put me out of the misery. That is it for the third season of the original series. So now, I will name my best, my favorite, and my least favorite episode of the third season. So first, let's get into my worst episode of the third season. And boy, howdy, do I have a lot of contenders for this. We got Spectre of the Gun, Elion of Troyes, And the Children Shall Lead, Spocks Brain, Plato's Stepchildren, The Paradise Syndrome, The Savage Curtain, The Way to Eden, but of course, the number one worst episode of the third season is Turnabout Intruder, for all the reasons I just said. I just don't want to get into it again, but yes, I do think this is the worst episode of the whole show. It's just bad. I just don't. I can't believe it exists. So, best episode of season 3. We have contenders for this. We have Tholian Webb, Dave the Dove, a Requiem for Mathklasa, Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, The Cloud Miners, and All Our Yesterdays, 2 very close runner-ups because I love these episodes. That's why I think I love season 3, because it's such good episodes. But I'm gonna have to say, for my favorite episode of the third season, I'm gonna have to choose this episode because I am not an insect. I am Lord Garth, Master of the Universe. Whom Gods Destroy. You're wrong. This episode is good. I love this episode so much. I think is one of I think is the most suspenseful, the best battle of wits. I think Izar is clearly the best villain ever to appear in the original series. Because I am Lord Garth. Anyway, so yeah. So that is my pick for best episode of the third season. So, my rating for season 3 of Star Trek The Original Series out of 10 is going to be a 5 average. Now, I was close to giving this one a 6. I almost wanted to give it a 6, but which is what I gave season 2, by the way. But, yeah, the fact that it has 3 of the worst episodes of the entire show at the very end, almost, not back to back because they're intercut between good episodes, but still, like, bunched together there. Yeah, that's gotta bring it down to at least a 5. And, you know, not only that, but of course the first, like, half of the season was torture to sit through. It was boring and uninteresting and not very good, and then it picks up in the middle a bit, but you still have crap sprinkled in even throughout the good episodes. So 5 out of 10 for Star Trek the Original Series season 3. So that is it for my review for Star Trek season 3 of the Original Series. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, that's it for your coverage of the original series. You're done. So next month you're going to be doing top 10 or top 30 best and worst episode list. But to quote the Changeling, you're wrong! I'm actually going to cover the animated series, and I'm going to roll that right in to my coverage of the original series, because I don't really see the animated series as a separate show. It's kind of just like, it's like the season 4 of the original series. In fact, many of the scripts that were written for season 4 were rolled over for the animated series. So guess what? I'm going to count it as season 4, which, you know, you're going to say, well, that's dumb, Mark. And I'm going to say, I don't care. I'm going to do it anyway. So Next month I'll cover both seasons, because season 2 is only like 5 episodes, but both seasons of Star Trek the Animated Series, and then the month after I will do my top 30 best episodes and top 15 worst episodes of the original series and the animated series combined. Woo! Isn't that going to be fun? So you got that to look forward to. More Kirk and Spock, but this time more stilted, going the animated series. God, I love it. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to check out my channel as I review all sorts of other Star Trek shenanigans going on here and other shows such as Star Wars Rebels, The Expanse, and whatnot, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.